So today I have Alex Chao. He is a project manager at Microsoft, formerly a data scientist, and he is currently building next generation AI products at Microsoft with an emphasis on multimodal and large language models. And Alex will be speaking at the AI conference. You can meet him there in person. I'm the program chair. We have an outstanding event lined up for you, September 26 to 27 in San Francisco, aiconference.com for details. Go to the episode notes, and I'll even stick a discount code in there. And with that long-winded introduction, Alex, welcome to the Data Exchange podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Ben.
All right, so today, the main subject of this podcast is a very interesting open source project, which I think, in my mind, is a bit under-discussed. I kind of like it myself, and it's called Semantic Kernel. It's out of Microsoft. And Alex, let me read out to you the official definition on the page. It's an open source SDK that lets you easily combine AI services like OpenAI, Azure OpenAI, Hugging Face, with conventional programming languages like C# and Python. By doing so, you can create AI apps that combine the best of both worlds. So, first of all, Alex, I guess a natural point to start for most of these open source projects is how did it get started? And what was the context? So by context, I mean, obviously, we've had GPT-3 and then ChatGPT, but obviously there were LLM APIs available. And then after ChatGPT, shortly after, there were these open source projects that came on the scene, LangChain, Llama Index, Unstructured. I don't know if you're familiar with Unstructured. And so what was the context in which Semantic Kernel came about?
Yeah. I mean, I'm personally a huge fan of origin stories. So the Semantic Kernel has an interesting one. So the project started actually as an internal incubation or investigation, if you will, inside the office of the CTO. The sponsoring CVP for that was Sam Scalacci. He was the original founder of Writely, which became Google Docs. And he saw that this current moment that we're in, which we actually had early access to GPT-4 and inside the office of the CTO. So in our own internal investigations of it, we actually found that it was certainly a leap forward from the GPT-3 and previous models. And by doing so, it actually allowed a lot more just ability to do complex programming tasks that not only incorporated reasoning, but also could even just do things for you. And this sort of next level behavior for us, we were investigating okay, how could we maybe deploy it here and there in a couple of different product scenarios, and we did some early work around browser automation or automatically transcribing a meeting and creating summary notes from that Q&A and all these sort of things. And while all these products and features actually, you can see them being rolled out in internal Microsoft products and also, all over the enterprise, we actually found that this sort of programming pattern or programming paradigm where you code against a large language model and you combine things like just how you natively program, that pattern was something that we found to be very powerful. And just for context for listeners, right? These models, yes, are super powerful in and of themselves. You can make a direct call with an API, no problem, and it could do some very impressive things. But the reason why you want to code against it is, for one, these models by themselves are stateless, so they don't. When you pass in your request to OpenAI, Azure OpenAI, GPT-4, right? It will operate with whatever prompt you give it, but it's not going to remember. It's not going to have any memory by itself. So these sort of things where, yeah, you want to incorporate a lot more of these programming patterns we found to be super important for us. And hence, we started off as an internal SDK, and we started to tinker around with these ideas. And once we realized that, hey, this space is moving so quickly, we wanted to really get it out there and learn with the community, not just at Microsoft, not just inside the office of the CTO, but to distribute it more broadly. We made the decision, I believe it was in early March, to open source it, to get it out there. So at the beginning, the primary team and the project started off as a C# SDK, and we can go into the reasons why that first, but started off as that, and then gradually we soon after made it Python, and soon to be also announced Java as well. So
and for our listeners, I will link to the high level overview of Semantic Kernel, but it has a very kind of I would say natural and understandable high level design. So you start out with a kernel, then there's the notion of memory skills and abilities, events, semantic knowledge. So I guess the question for you, Alex, is, was this design arrived at from the get-go, or was it over time organically emerged that this is the natural design?
Yeah, I would say it was the product of lots of internal discussions, internal debates. We, as a design principle, we wanted it to be as lightweight as possible. So a kernel instance is very easy to spin up, easy to tear down. If anything, we actually promote or encourage developers to just use them per API request that you're sending. And how we came to be, or it starts with a kernel instance, and yes, you attach a model service an OpenAI or whichever. You attach maybe embedding service as well. So there's text completion, chat completion, embedding, and then yes, as you mentioned, you can also attach memory to it. And this memory can come in the form of a
RAM.
In memory, volatile memory store. It could make use of a traditional SQLite type database, or what's become more popular and more relevant for large language model applications is vector databases. So that's
this notion, Alex, of the kernel is as the starting point. So you mentioned something interesting there. So the kernel is something that you even encourage people every time they call the API, they spin up a new kernel.
Yeah, more often there's a discussion. We also discuss among the community and internally, should these kernels be long-running instances or short-run? We probably would push people towards saying more short-run, because they are very cheap to spin up and tear down.
Oh, I see. But if you have something, if you want to connect to an external service, what's the point of spinning it up and down if you know that you're going to be going back and forth?
Yeah. I think this kind of goes into, and we can talk later about this in more detail, about this idea of context, and what sort of context do you want to supply to each invocation of a model. And for the typical pattern is to do this sort of retrieval augmented generation, right? And that involves making your prompt as best suited, best formatted, and as context rich as possible. So the way we do that is we have a custom but hopefully simple prompt templating schema that allows you to directly insert variables if you want, and even to call what we call native or semantic functions within them. So if you have, I don't know, a summarization skill or a translation skill, or some other plugin that you want to incorporate, like a ChatGPT plugin, you could all express that inside the prompt. And then, yes, you can even recall memories from a memory store using, lookup or semantic retrieval with embeddings. And that all is to ultimately create a well-crafted prompt. One of our core principles is ask smart to get smart. So that this is coming from Sam Scalacci, where you want to make sure that whatever request that you send to the model, right, it's as full, featured. You employ a lot of the best prompt engineering practices to this. So things like incorporating like few shot examples, or just being very explicit of like what you want, what format you want the output to look like. And what we found is that, yeah, you want to make sure that that ask that you're giving to the AI is just as good as you can. One of my colleagues likes to describe it as, imagine you're talking to a 2-year-old, but a 2-year-old that has like the knowledge of the universe inside their brain. So you have to be just very explicit, like what it is you want to do.
So the kernel, as I understand it, encourages function composition, right? So you combine multiple functions into a single pipeline, and so having said that, Alex, at this point, what are some examples of applications or scenarios where you've kind of been surprised by how people use semantic kernel? So you don't have to limit yourself to just Microsoft people, but as the product manager, I'm sure you kind of pay attention to how people are using it, right? So
yeah. So one thing, like the benefit of us having this sort of like skills/plugins framework is that it's very much encouraged to be interoperable. Like if you have skills or plugins from, I don't know, let's just say gaming, right? And you wanted to make use of that in your personal like application, you could just import them in and get like use of them. This kind of encourages more of like a marketplace, if you will, of discoverable skills and plugins.
And speaking of this notion, so obviously there's other projects out there that somewhat cover the same ground, right? So LangChain, to some extent, Llama Index. So those projects have a lot more integrations. My pet peeve right now with SK is there doesn't seem to be a lot of integration. So speaking of integrations, what do you have today? Where can people find them? And if they don't exist, how hard is it for people to write one of those?
Yeah. So one thing that we are actually promoting as our roadmap for going into the fall is centralizing around 3 things: plugins, planners, and personas. So it's really actually this piece about integrations is like anything that can be expressed as a plugin. And when I say plugin, I'm actually referring more towards the ChatGPT style, like open API schema plugin, where you can connect it to some API or you have some native code, and then you just expose like the description, the parameters and all that, and the AI can make use of that or call them. So honestly, anything that can be expressed that way, which is everything, and that those are connectors, those are integrations that can be brought in. So
But
today,
is there going to be a hub? Like Llama Index has this Llama Hub, which is great for finding things, right? So
yes, I am personally an advocate for this. We are actively trying to figure out like how to express that. It may live in some Azure marketplace somewhere or somewhere else. But yes, like we want these things to be discoverable. Today, you do like most core plugins or core skills are either like shipped directly with the repo, or because it's like a C# SDK. Also, we have several or separate like NuGet packages as well that people can bring in. Whether, let's say, give an example, like a Bing search or Google search like connector, right? Those would be like add-ons that you could attach to your kernel if you so wanted. Things like GitHub, if we have some other ones where, if we wanted to like integrate Jira as well. So it's not like there's no shortage of integrations that we could pursue. It's just that, from our side,
They're
we probably
harder to find. They're harder to find, right?
it is a little difficult to find. This is why we actually one of our samples that we ship is called Copilot Chat. That is effectively like our implementation of a chatbot experience that people can actually just fork and use. And we're seeing enterprises like do that already, where they're just reskinning it. But that is our demonstration vehicle to show off like all these plugins that you could just quickly import and quote unquote like discover there and then bring it in.
But
So
and I was emailing you this before this episode. But one of my main use cases is reading web pages or PDFs.
mhm,
Those
mhm.
don't seem to exist easily.
Yeah, this I would say right now we've taken more of this, what do you want to call it? Less opinionated approach. So I think some of the other popular frameworks out there basically, will ship a like one line example of like, oh yeah, this is how you like do it. And
You folks should consider this, because this is
oh yeah.
this is how you
I
get people to use these things. Otherwise, actually, right now I'm still having to read source code for SK to
uh,
figure
yeah.
out how to do things. But yeah, and honestly, Alex, there's other parts of the ecosystem that you can leverage, like unstructured. We talked about unstructured, right? So
Mhm.
unstructured, for our listeners, you can find it unstructured.io. In full disclosure, I'm an advisor. Um, is ETL for LLMs, but it allows you to, for example, bring in your own data into
Yeah.
these LLMs, right? So integrate with those, and then people can start integrating external external data sources much more
Mhm.
easily, right?
Yeah.
And I get that you folks are into C#, but the vast majority of your users are probably going to be Python or JavaScript, right?
Well, let's talk about that a bit. So originally, right, the reason why it started as C# was, well, one, the team composition was more familiar with C#, but also like we recognize that there's a lot of we'll call it great work in the Python community.
Yeah.
I know I'm
Yeah.
previous data scientist myself. I love Python. If I primarily interact with SK, I'm using the Python version. But right, that it has created this sort of scenario or situation where the other, developers and
Language.
other
Yeah.
ecosystems, other languages don't really have a easy way to participate, right? So whether that be the C# community or the Java community, which have like big enterprise
Yeah.
backing, right, and
Yep.
enterprise like support, that's where there's this gap, and that's why we purposely said like, okay, we're gonna first target and launch for these communities. The persona that we're going after is like the app developer, maybe not necessarily the research or data scientist, which is often interfacing with Python.
Has already tools that they can use. But I guess the reason I specifically say Python and JavaScript is because I guess just my personal selfish reasons, in that
Mhm.
I think this actually your model in SK is quite good, that it would be great to actually have the Python people actually use it. And I would say the only thing that holds them back is maybe the tooling is not on par with what they would expect, right? But,
Yeah.
but in terms of the model and this, it's very easy to understand the architecture of SK, right?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, we are looking to solicit that feedback, and I agree that from the Python side, which is catching up. Honestly, we are trying to add more features, integrate more, but we recognize that to catch up, it takes a bit more purposeful design, because a lot of things that are, let's say, are in C# don't necessarily translate as cleanly as into Python. So all that to say is that we're taking a more methodical, maybe you can argue, yeah, it's slower approach to launching these things. But yes, we are doing so because we have this design in mind, right? We are very confident in like this is a good, what do you call it, structure for building these type of applications, because we are informed by a lot of the Microsoft Copilots that are being built internally and real products that are being shipped to millions and millions of users. So that's why it's like we, have this benefit of like being able to take all these learnings from what we've internally built, and then also now share it out to the public. So
Yeah.
all,
It seems like semantic kernel is one of these things that you can deploy to production, right? I mean, it's simple enough. It's not. It doesn't seem like it would get in the way for you to actually deploy to production. I'm not naming other projects here that change every day, but listeners who are in the know will know what I'm talking about. But like, for example, so as I said, so the components are are easy to understand, right? So you have the kernel, you've got the notion of memory and skills, and then that breaks down into skills, abilities, episodic events, facts, documents, and then semantic knowledge. And then you have the notion of a pipeline, which also is very natural. You have ask, plan, execute, and then you have the result. Now, Alex, in the context of thinking about and reading about semantic kernel, a word that I keep thinking about and actually have come across as well in the documentation is orchestration.
Mhm.
So talk to us about orchestration and semantic kernel, and why do you need orchestration?
Yeah, this is probably like the question, or like why it's important to have any of these frameworks, whether that be semantic kernel, LangChain, or these other ones, because you could argue that, oh, I could just directly interface with the
Yeah,
API, right?
once I know what I'm doing, right? So maybe I use one of these things to kind of explore.
Yeah.
And then when I know the sequence of things I need to do, then I go directly to the API, right?
Yeah, and I'm not discouraging people from going that approach, if that's, if you're comfortable doing that. I think the reason why orchestration is important is, so I would bucket it into two ways, right? There's a manual type orchestration where you explicitly define the skills, the functions that you want to call, and the sequence and order that you call them, and then you could define a very concrete pipeline to do that. But the other piece is what is more like AI orchestration. And this is covered by what we're calling the planner, or planning in general. And this is where,
Is this
if
like a
you
database planner?
no, well, not exactly, but this is actually more of like taking the ask or the query from the user, right? And then having the kernel decide itself, using the functions and plugins that it has available to it, what order, what sequence of functions should I call to achieve the goal that I want. So this
So
idea,
it's almost like declarative. This is what I want to do, and then the
Mhm.
planner, which is some kind of query optimizer, will decide the sequence.
Kind of, yeah. That's why there's strong parallels to like the database language. We call it like goal-oriented AI, or goal-oriented programming, where another principle is that we have for a semantic kernel is these AI models are going to continue to get better, but your native code will not. So, like,
Or
this is where
doesn't have to be.
yeah, and if you define your own pipeline, right, and this is very true. When I was a data scientist creating ETL pipelines and all this stuff, it can be very brittle, right? Something can break, or some schema can change, and it just like demolishes your whole work. So for this, right, the more you're able to offload or leverage the AI to do more of this, planning, and then the following like orchestration, that just becomes a lot more powerful, and just allows you to just focus more on the end goal that you want, or end result that you want to deliver to your user, as opposed to figuring out like, oh, I need to stitch together XYZ myself to do this.
And so going back to documentation and this hub, what kind of improvements or resources are we expecting as people who use semantic kernel over the next, say, 6 to 12 months?
Yes, so I am a big advocate for improving everything, the onboarding experience to reading documentation to having tutorials, examples to build off of. Today, right now, we do have a docs page that actually just got refreshed and revamped. So it has like code snippets for Python, C#, soon to be Java, of like, okay, this concept is expressed in this. You can just copy paste this code to use it. I'm a big advocate or proponent for notebooks as well to communicate concepts and have a runnable guide to explain some topic. So those, I learned for the first time that actually C# supports Jupyter notebooks, and that's through inside VS Code. They have a polyglot extension. And
I actually, one of the things that I would like to see is more like a cookbook, like many recipes, right? So here's how I do this one thing, and then here's how I do this other thing, and this, and then I can stitch it together.
Yeah. So my colleague John Maida has created these. I believe he calls it a cookbook or recipe book, or because he likes to use the cooking analogy to describe this. John is the VP of AI and design at Microsoft, and he's very good at expressing these concepts in a kind of more creative way. So he has it in C#. I actually forked it and created a Python version on my own GitHub. So if your listeners want to check that out. But yes, I completely am in agreement that like we should have more of these cookbooks, and even honestly more opinionated samples of like, oh yeah, this is how you could do XYZ using the semantic kernel. Because as you mentioned, right, the listeners, if they're coming to the project for the first time, it might not have the bandwidth to look into the code directly. So they want an easy onboarding experience, more like plug and play sort of things that they can just quickly try out.
Yeah. And the more of these micro tasks you have, the more you can kind of just piece together and accomplish the task you want to do. And by the way, Alex, what about JavaScript?
Yeah, so JavaScript. So today we have a old version of a TypeScript port of the semantic kernel that was created by the community, and I am in full agreement that like TypeScript or JavaScript is a huge community that we should go after. But just from our own bandwidth, like we have not been able to directly support it. So this is where like if the community, right, and the blessing of being in open source is that you get to tap into very passionate and motivated developer communities all around the world. Yeah, like if they want to see TypeScript happen, we have the path for people to do so. It's just not, for now, it's just not on our immediate roadmap to have another like dedicated support for that, because right now it's C#, Python, and Java that are going to be the primary languages we will support, and that's mostly due to our customer discovery of, at least for the enterprises, which we're targeting, right? What they care about today.
So for people who may be curious and may want to try semantic kernel, right? So one of the things sometimes people are hesitant to invest in a project which may not be around for long. So what is the level of commitment inside Microsoft for this project?
Yeah, this is a great question. I've heard it multiple times from enterprises and just individuals. And I think Microsoft has sometimes has had a like unfortunate history of deprecating some projects that people enjoyed or took dependencies on. I will say that from what I know, and I'll share from my perspective, like we made some very big, like vocal commitments inside Microsoft recent build conference, even where Satya, CEO, Kevin Scott, CTO, literally said on stage, like the semantic kernel is the AI orchestrator of choice being developed internally and open source to you all for the community to use. So from that side, right, these are, and we have real production deployments, not just inside Microsoft, but from real huge Azure customers as well. So all those signals, to me, those are good things to say like, okay, Microsoft is backing this, it's behind this. And, in order to obviously continue that, right, it needs just to continue to grow, it needs to engage more of the community. We would love to see more people star the repo or even just like check it out, engage in the conversation on Discord, right? We have weekly community office hours, even that I host and my colleagues host. And all those forums or channels are ways to get involved, to give us feedback, like all this great feedback that you're providing, Ben. Please like continue to pass that along. And yeah, like we want to
honestly,
grow.
Alex, at this point, I would say the code and the concepts are pretty cool. It's just documentation at this point, right now. I mean, if you guys can invest in documentation, this project will grow much, much, much bigger. And so another question. So memory. So can you explain the concept of memory inside semantic kernel?
Yeah. So memory goes back to this conversation around these large language models don't have state, right? And you have to kind of artificially inject that each time you talk to a large language model. And the memory is think of it as a store, right? It could be a volatile memory store or a record in several records in your database or embeddings inside a vector database. And all it really is, in my perspective, is a way for you to semantically retrieve the most relevant piece of this so that it fits within the token. So it fits within the token window of your prompt and allows you to, pass that to the large language model to give a more grounded and accurate response or, more desirable answer that you want. So memories are a super powerful concept because for now, right, this is the pattern and paradigm of coding against these large language models. I will say though, I think longer term with, as these models get more powerful and better, maybe at some point they have some sort of like built-in memory mechanism that like all these sort of engineered approaches that we're doing today may go away in the future. But for now, right, we are in this world where we operate with constraints, right? Engineering is all about, dealing with trade-offs and operating within some limits. And those limits are defined by the capacity of these large language models, right? GPT-4 can, I think, only support 32,000 tokens. Anthropic has 100,000, which is awesome. But even so, right, you probably want to, figure out ways to incorporate external data sources that, might not even be publicly like available on the web that these models have been trained on, especially like very factual ones that you need to get right. So that's where leveraging memory is super important.
So for our listeners, Alex, who don't follow this closely, right? So there's retrieval augmented generation, right? So using a vector database or some other data source, a knowledge graph or whatever, right? So retrieval augmented model. And then the people who interact with ChatGPT, right? So now they can see that they can go back and the thing remembers the session and basically you can ask the ChatGPT questions about prior questions. So these are two very different notions of memory. So exactly what are you in the world of semantic kernel, which of these are available?
So without giving too much away, because we actually have some stuff cooking inside our R&D portion of the semantic kernel, all these sort of things like I liken it to what the psychological terms of memory, or like whatever science has described as memory: long-term memory, short-term memory, episodic, hierarchical. All these sort of concepts actually will be sort of expressed soon inside the semantic kernel.
And the retrieval augmented stuff is already available for those who are adventurous and hearty.
Yes,
Go to the docs, right? So
yeah,
and there, I think you can, you can have things that fit in RAM, but you can also go to an external vector database if you need to, right?
that's right. That's right.
But yeah, you may have to do all of the loading yourself, which is you folks need to make that kind of a one-liner kind of thing, right? So here's the bunch of web pages, or here's my data in a directory. Just do it, and then now I can go do my thing. I don't have to load it, do embeddings, do asynchronous programming. Yeah, it should be a one-liner, Alex.
No, yeah, I hear you. I think if anything, if I have the time, I would want to create just like a abstraction on top of semantic kernel that just exposes these super simple opinionated APIs for doing exactly what you're describing, one-liners.
And then in terms of models, so obviously you folks have a relationship with OpenAI, but has semantic kernel been used against other APIs?
Yeah, yeah. So this is one that we have some integrations for today with, primarily through Hugging Face. So any Hugging Face text completion model that you can find, you can, and this is actually uniquely from the Python side, you can run it locally against your own, on your own machine. From C#, you have to use the Hugging Face like service because there isn't a native C# or .NET what do you call it, like runtime for Hugging Face local models. But anyway, so you can actually you can create skills, you can create functions, plugins using these models, and we have several examples inside the repo to do so. I will say that like there are this space is moving so quickly. There's all these other models, Falcon, but there's like a gorilla model, all these ones that have like animal names that are out there. And I for one would love to see how they work with the semantic kernel. With if you are able to still be like as expressive with the AI with what you want, because GPT-4 is still the leader.
But Alex, when I instantiate a kernel, right? So if it's OpenAI, I have to tell it what the model is, give it the obviously my credentials. Right. So, is there anything special about that though? I mean, so I guess you guys will have to make sure that type of call works for a new API provider, right? So is that the response? So as a user of semantic kernel, I have to wait until you guys do this integration with, let's say, new provider X, right? So
I mean, that is, if you want us to do it, for sure we can do it. Like the Hugging Face example is an interface that we implemented, but it's also, it's just something that there's a base like text completion interface that, yes, you can create yourself and then import that to the kernel and use.
And what is the level of contribution to SK outside of Microsoft? So in other words, if I look at the contributors, is it Microsoft heavy, or is it starting to just kind of disperse?
Yeah, I mean, I could take a look quickly today. That if today we have 129 contributors, of that only 20%, if not less, is Microsoft or the Microsoft core team. So we have a lot of external contributors, very motivated people as well, because they view it as like, oh yeah, Microsoft, the brand name, and but also just like the pattern, the programming pattern. It is catching on to some people.
The pattern is, I keep going back. The pattern is quite attractive, honestly. Yeah. And so,
thank you.
Yeah, we improved the documentation, Alex. We have a cookbook of micro recipes, and then a hub. You know,
Yes.
and then I think that that goes a long way.
Yes.
So if any Microsoft executives are listening to this podcast, please invest in those three things.
Please, please, we would love more dedicated resources. We're a small team, and we are doing with what we can.
Yeah. And so I asked you this earlier, but usage of SK outside of Microsoft, you're giving a talk at the conference in a month or so. Let's say I give you 2 to 3 slides, Alex. What are the 2 to 3 most interesting use cases or case studies of SK to date? What would those 2 to 3 be?
Yeah, without naming names.
You don't have to limit yourself to Microsoft, right? So
of course, without naming names. Maybe by the time of the conference, we might be able to name some names, but without naming names, we have some. The number one use case at the enterprise level, external to Microsoft, is being able to chat over your own data.
Yeah.
And that involves many things, right? Because data can live in so many different places. And then once you actually have that, then okay, how do you have a non-technical user be able to have an experience?
And for this use case, the volume of the data is such that you need a vector database.
You need something, yeah, because there's no way you can stuff it out.
So we're talking more than gigabytes, so maybe a few terabytes of data potentially.
Yeah, and they could be across many tables, many stores, different databases. So
this pattern of chatting over your own data, that well-worn path in SK. Okay, so use case number 2.
Use case number 2, I would say, some things that I'm seeing happen is being able to sort of use more agentic or planning type behavior inside inside some interface. It doesn't have to be a chat interface, but just
elaborate.
Yeah. So let's say, I don't know, let's say I wanted to book a flight, right? And it doesn't have to be a chatbot that I'm talking to book it. But, based off of the actions that I'm taking on the page, for example, or what I know about the user, which is another big thing, right? If you can incorporate, let's say, the Microsoft Graph as an example, or whatever other identity management thing that you have, then you can actually create a more personalized recommendation type experience, or even a guided flow on your page. So we actually have several
this is like actually accomplishing the task as opposed to talking to customers on AI customer support. Okay.
That's right. So we have some very strong e-commerce type use cases that have come up where they want to.
So a scenario would be the classic scenario for this would be that people have always wanted to do is I want to book a very complicated multi-leg flight, right? So that where I go hop around different cities and then I may come back a different way, right? So so this is a kind of agent that would be able to accomplish this.
Yeah, and honestly, even something a bit more simple, like, hey, I'm trying to do shopping, right? And I want to be able to get a offer or coupon to use. How does the site know which coupon to recommend based off the user? So we're seeing semantic kernel being used for more traditional recommendation.
So for use case 1 and 2, so use case 1, chatting over your data, use case 2, some kind of agentic behavior. Are these prototypes or people are starting to productionize?
Use case number 1 is for sure going to production. Major Azure customers are already doing so. Agent 2 scenario 2 is probably more at the prototype stage, although from at least one customer I know, they are moving quite quickly and moving forward with it. And
for use case 1 and 2, again, go back to what we discussed earlier. Obviously, use case one in particular, you might be able to code directly to some API. You don't
Mhm.
need some kind of orchestration.
Sure.
By the way, so should we start referring to semantic kernel and similar projects as your orchestrator? Is that
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So
I like that
so
term.
so I could do use case one without an orchestration tool, right? So, and what's the argument for doing it with uh, an orchestration tool?
Well, one, I think with any SDK, right, the pitch or promise of that is that it just makes it easier. There are patterns that you can, use, reuse, and they are quote unquote like battle tested because we are using it in our own production scenarios.
You
And
can switch the model easy, right?
yeah, it's good. So it just is a easier quality of life. I liken it to like if you're going to create a game, why would you not use something like Unity or Unreal as your
Right.
starting point, right? Why do something from scratch?
So some
So
people, Alex, use the word chain, right? So
mhm,
chaining things. So this also obviously semantic kernel, because of its notion of pipelines,
mhm,
it's actually very canonical to do it in semantic kernel, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So what is the third use case if there is one?
So one use case that I've seen that I think is very interesting is using the semantic kernel as a way to kind of express responsible AI kind of components. And that's using it as a skill or creating skills for that kind of or encapsulate the values that you want. I'll just give you an example, like Xbox, right? What we're working with the Xbox team, they want to make use of responsible AI in whatever application, whether that be an in-game chat or customer service chat. But in a gaming scenario, right? If there are certain phrases, certain words that are okay to talk about, like more violent type phrases that are fine to use, but may not be what you see in like the Bing AI, right?
Right.
That they have their own responsible AI layer. So I think using the semantic kernel as a way to communicate values is very interesting, and that's because we put as a first class like these plugins or skills that a developer or a team can create that are custom to them, but then you can interweave them or mix them with the other plugins or skills that you have. So that's where it's like that scenario, right? And it's not just gaming. You can imagine healthcare being another one, or and other places that, yeah, you just want to be mindful of or careful of like how you express something to the end user.
So in terms of Alex, in terms of contributing to semantic semantic kernel, um, w- where where is the most need, and how easy is it to contribute towards that very much in demand need? Is it the integrations, or feel free to
Yeah. So I would say for one is any issue that you see on our GitHub, we make our roadmap and project boards completely public, so you can see at any given time what the team is working on for our sprint, as well as what's on our backlog. So if people want to take an item from there, they're more than welcome to. In terms of some kind of like low-hanging fruit things I would identify, it goes back to this idea that we're emphasizing plugins, planners, and personas. So the plugins piece is the integration story where, yeah, if there are data loaders that you want
yeah,
or
yeah. So
APIs.
this would be the case where if you had a hub, then people
Hmm.
can see what's missing,
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah, for sure. The planners piece though is more interesting and would I would steer the more data scientists, researchers to investigate, because today we have launched a few different planners, more so on the C# side, catching up on the Python side, but things like a React type pattern or even just more like a sequential based planner. Like these are all ones that we recognize there's a lot more work to be done here and a lot more research and innovation to happen, especially when all this talk about agents is floating around. So I know a lot of people have a lot of great ideas there. So if people are adventurous enough to implement something like that,
reinforcement learning planner. Huh?
sure, yeah, no, yeah, like
Yeah.
something that's more dynamic that can receive or respond to users' input, or I think that is super interesting, because usually like these planners that you've seen so far usually just will take the ask and just like keep running, or and not solicit a external signal,
Or may have like a few high rules, maybe.
sure, yeah,
Yeah. So in closing, as I mentioned, Alex will be speaking at the AI conference. You can meet him there, and maybe he can bring along some semantic kernel people as well, other people in the team. AIconference.com for details. So my final question to you, Alex, is we're a former data scientist, now product manager. How would you describe the transition from data scientist to product manager? And for our data scientist listeners, what recommendations would you give if they wanted to transition towards PM?
Yeah, I would say that it's not a path for everyone, because the same sort of skills or things that you develop as a data scientist may not always like carry over. I think but there are several like commonalities, and that's why it's like if you want a more holistic experience, or like where you talk not just to an engineering team or your own data science team, but you talk to customers, you talk to the business side, marketing side, and all that stuff, and really get involved with the whole product life cycle. I think, yeah, people who have data scientist skills, which is at the core of it, just being inquisitive about data, about wanting to find the truth of the matter, and then creating, algorithms or techniques or visualizations or things like that to get there. I think that is very, transferable. Now, like my advice or my story would be that it's often hard to break into PM, just in general, categorically, because it is a more general position. You're competing against like MBAs or other people who may not have as strong of a technical background. But if you are a data scientist already, right, that's how you can differentiate yourself and really show that, especially if you're working on a technical product, right, you can say like, hey, like I
And
have.
especially now where a lot of products are AI or data driven, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So I imagine we'll very soon see more AI product managers or data scientists turn PMs, just because of the ubiquity of these tools and APIs and all that,
It's,
lowering the barrier of entry.
it sounds like a good book project for Alex. So, and with that,
Maybe.
thank you, Alex.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ben, for having me. Really enjoyed our conversation.